This video is brought to you by NordVPN. See the link in the description to get a big 75% discount for a limited time only. That's only $2.99 a month for the early VPN to get a perfect score from PC Mac. With the release of the Resident Evil 2 remake, now makes a good time to take a look back at the original version of the iconic game and how it was changed in different countries around the world. Unbeknownst to many gamers, the Japanese version of the original PlayStation release actually had many differences to the versions released in the rest of the world. Aside from, like other games, being called Biohazard rather than the West Resident Evil, in Japan there were actually many alterations made to lower the game's difficulty. Whilst no official reasoning has been given for this was most likely due to the devs feeling that Japanese gamers were perhaps not as accustomed to the 3D games that had just started to become popular during this time, as Censored Gaming has previously covered numerous other titles from this period with similar changes due to this reason. In fact, the first Resident Evil game also had various changes in Japan to lower the game's difficulty, including Jill and Chris having more health, enemies having less health, ink ribbons containing 3 rather than the West 2, and the game having auto-aim, which was completely removed overseas. The Japanese version of the second game though would be made arguably even easier. Like the first game, enemies have less health, the player has more, and ink ribbons contain 3 rather than 2. Auto-aim is also always on with no way to disable it, whilst overseas it's automatically disabled unless you manually choose control type C. As well as this, there are now not only less enemies in total in the game, but the positions of some enemies have been changed to make things even easier. Item placements were also changed and there is now more ammo and health to pick up. This all culminates into a much different and easier experience in the Japanese release. Japanese gamers would eventually be able to experience the Western version of the game though, as in the later DualShock version, the Japanese version included a new optional mode called USA version, which reverted these changes. But that's not all for the changes found in Japan. A curious change was made to the rankings, where the highest rank upon completing the game is a S rank in Japan and then A, B, C and D. In the Western release, the S rank was removed and it now goes from an A rank to an E rank. Despite this, however, the English instruction manual still says that the highest rank is an S rank even though it doesn't exist, likely leading to a lot of confusion for players. Rather infamously, Resident Evil 2 would also be the first game in the series where the Japanese version will start to get censorship changes to tone down the game's violence. Most games in the series have been toned down in Japan since then, and whilst nowadays this is the result of the rules of Japan's Zero rating system, which has strict limits on how much violence can be shown in-game, Resident Evil 2 was released before the Japanese rating system was even created. However, due to a recent series of school murders in 1997, which were dubbed the Kobe child murders and blamed on violent games and media, there had been a growing concern over violent content in the public, leading to developers to begin to self-censor their games until the Japanese rating system was finally introduced in 2002. In Resident Evil 2's case, the player death scenes were reworked so that the screen fades to pitch black with the words "you died" appearing over the screen. In the overseas release, you could continue to see the monsters viciously mauling the players and delivering their final blows. Published nearly 2 years after the original PlayStation version, the Japanese Dreamcast release was titled Biohazard 2 Value Plus, unlike the West where it was just called Resident Evil 2. There were also some differences in-game, with the Japanese version having Hunk, Tofu, as well as Extreme Battle unlocked by default. The Japanese Dreamcast release also contained a demo for Resident Evil Code Veronica, which would be released a few months later. Moving things away from Japan for now though, and over to Italy. In a rather rare move for the country, the game would actually be banned in the region for a brief period in 1999. This was due to a political civil rights movement campaigning over the game's violence, leading to a seizure decree of the game. Over 5,000 unsold copies of the game were then seized by law enforcement until Sony managed to convince those responsible in Italy to reconsider their decision, allowing the game to once again resume sale as normal. Over in Germany, on the other hand, gamers wouldn't be so lucky. Whilst initially released in the region with no issues, the game would be shortly after release placed on the German government's index. In short, this means that the game would no longer be able to be sold in public view, restricting the sale to under-counters, and it also outlaws any form of public advertising. This effectively kills a game's commercial viability in the region, and thus all future releases of the game were heavily censored in Germany. The censored versions contain the same censorship to the player death scenes found in the Japanese version, meaning you'll no longer be able to see the character's gruesome final moments. The German versions though tone things down even more than that. All of the blood effects when inflicting damage were were changed for the German market so that the blood is no longer a crimson red, but instead a whitish grey colour. However, these blood changes weren't done consistently, as when enemies died, their corpses would be surrounded by a new green blood colour instead, rather than the red blood found in all other countries. These problems with Resident Evil 2 in Germany lasted for many years, and various later entries in the series also had to be toned down in the German market as well. In 2014, however, both Resident Evil 2 and 3 were finally removed from the German government's index, meaning uncensored releases are now finally possible. Furthermore, the more modern entries in the series have been able to be published in the country with no issues. This includes the brand new Resident Evil 2 remake, which was confirmed by Capcom over on their German Instagram page to be 100% uncut in the region. Nowadays, however, the censorship seen back in 1998 in the series' home country of Japan continues on to this day. As Censored Gaming has previously reported, Resident Evil 7 was heavily censored in Japan even for the max-rated Sarah Z version, which contains extra violence than the lower age rating D version. Additionally, like the channel recently covered, Resident Evil 2 Remake will also be released in two versions in Japan, with one having a higher age rating, but it again looks like the max-rated version will still have changes made due to the various rules and limits of the Japanese Sarah rating system. What do you think about the various regional differences found in Resident Evil 2? And what do you think about the censorship that continues to affect the series in Japan? Please let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and consider subscribing to the channel to see more videos on how video games and other media are changed around the world. Until next time, thank you for watching.